Julie and Nikki. We'll just start then so we can get going.
Yeah, we don't have much time.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
a short listen.
Yeah. So Andrew Whitecross is the branch manager of Family Payments and Child Support in the Department of Families, Community Services and Indigenous Affairs. He looks after an enormous budget, and I'll just give you an indication, correct me if I'm wrong. So in family payments alone, so has anyone heard of Family Tax Benefit Part A, Family Tax Benefit Part B? Okay, they're payments, school kids funds. They're payments to assist families with the cost of caring for children. And in those two payments alone, it's an $18 billion budget about per year. 1.69 million families in Australia receive Family Tax Benefit Part A. So that's an enormous payment to look after. And we have Andrew here to talk to us about green papers, pardon me, which you guys are going to be writing as part of your assessment for this unit and as part of the 2020 Vision Project.
Okay, thank you very much. You said something about me. I'm a bit worried about this testing, but I'm going to pretend to talk to you. A couple of things I wanted to do just to start with. One is to say that green papers is one approach to the business of government communicating with the community about its policy intentions or how it could change policy. Even though I'm talking about green papers, none of the things that I've done have actually involved a green paper. They've involved other kinds of consultation processes, but not green paper processes per se, but that doesn't mean I don't know how they work. But there are other kinds of things. You can have a consultation process before you write a green paper. You can have a report to government. You often hear the government talking about, oh, we're going to ask the Productivity Commission to write a report for us. So then they write a report. The government then considers the report and responds to the report. It's a slightly different process to a green paper, but they all have the same effect, which is providing a mechanism for canvassing public opinion on policy change and getting advice on policy change. So, which I guess takes me to the first question: why would government want to have a green paper in the first place? Anyone got any thoughts on that? Why do we need green papers? Why would anyone think it was a good idea? So we've got the first thing is that the government's issue green papers because there's a policy problem that they think that needs to be addressed. So there's something that's happening which they think they need to make some change on, and so wanting to make change is one of the key reasons why you go down this path in the first place. The second reason why you might have a green paper process is because you're not sure what path to go down. We've made different options and you're trying to decide which is the best option and you want some expert advice on it. So you might want to get the benefit of that expert advice in the green paper process. But one of the key things about a green paper process is that it's a consultative process. And so to make that consultative process work, you want to consult because you want to know what the community thinks. You want to get input into the community, from the community into your thinking, so that you can make a better informed decision about which way to go. And there are two kinds of reasons why you might want to do that. One is because even though you've got all these expert public servants who've been working on these things for years, and who often know quite a lot about the subject, public servants and governments don't know everything. And so one of the reasons why you have a green paper process is because you want to find out more about the subject from the community. And so the green paper process is about stimulating thinking about the issue and trying to get input from other people. Maybe you're thinking of doing a particular kind of policy, but you don't know how that's going to affect everybody in the community. The green paper process gives you a chance to find out how it's going to affect people. If I decided tomorrow that I was going to ban firewood, right, don't know exactly how that's going to affect everybody in the community, but if I said, well, I'm going to ban firewood, then we're looking at options for reducing pollution in air pollution or something, and one of the options we're looking at is banning firewood, and I'll put that out in the green paper. People would be able to tell me, well, how that would affect them, and the firewood, producers would be able to tell us what it would do to their livelihoods, and householders would be able to tell us it's going to cost them so many $1,000s to replace their wood heater with something else because they weren't allowed to burn wood anymore. And I'd start to get a picture of how my policy would impact on the community. So that's one kind of input that I'm going to get from that green paper process. There's another kind of input I'm going to get from a green paper process, and that is input about what the community opinion is, or what they will tolerate. So governments don't just operate; can't just do what they like. In reality, governments operate within, and politicians operate within a community, and there's this idea that you'll hear about in political science, if you study political science, called legitimacy. And for governments to actually do things, they have to have the support of the people to do them. And if people won't support them, or if people are hostile to what they're trying to do, it becomes much harder for them to make the policy work. Because government policies are all implemented by people, and people have to cooperate with government to make rules work. And if people don't agree with the rules, or if the people who are being asked to implement them don't agree with the rules, then it will be very hard for government to make the policy work. And so gauging whether the community really believes that this is a good idea, and that they agree that it's a fair idea and that all the problems are being thought through, helps to ensure that the community will support the policy in the end and will help to make the policy work. So that kind of legitimacy is an important part of what we're trying to do. So learning more about the problem, making sure we haven't forgotten anything, making sure that the community is supporting it, gauging which options people think are going to best work, are all part of that process. You know, when there are other political things, putting pressure on the opposition to go along with what you're trying to do, you know, there are other kinds of things that people are trying to do with green papers, but basically they're the kinds of things that we're looking for. When do we use green papers? We use green papers when we've got a complicated problem. If it's a simple problem, like should we have a stop sign at the end of the street, you don't usually need a green paper for that, right? Where you need green papers is where you've got complicated problems to solve with competing interests, where you're not going to be able to make everybody completely happy, but you're going to do your best to try and get something which is fair to as many people as possible, and which is going to be as effective as possible. And so it tends to be complicated problems that get put into this process. And there's some examples in the presentation about this. There are examples like homelessness. Homelessness is a very complicated problem to solve. There are problems to do with how housing is allocated, the cost of housing, whether there's enough housing, the circumstances of the people. Often they've got messed up lives and they have trouble functioning in normal sort of rental situations. Maybe they don't have enough money to build housing. There's a whole lot of things go together to cause homelessness in Australia. And so coming up with policies which are going to address homelessness is complicated. And so the government issued a green paper for that because it wanted to canvass ideas about how to address homelessness and how to ensure that as few people as possible ended up homeless in Australia. So that's so they tend to be complicated policies where there's not just one solution to the thing, so to the problem that they're looking at. So just looking at coming to our presentation, what is a green paper? Well, I've described the green paper in the presentation as a preliminary report of government proposals. So it's options for doing something about it. It's published to stimulate discussion, as we've been discussing. it details specific issues. So green papers try and explain what the problem is that they're dealing with, what the evidence is about why it is a problem, what the evidence is about why the different kinds of proposals that are in the green paper might help. So they're key things. So it's got detail. It's not just broad brush ideas. It's trying to come to grips with the detail of the problem. It provides courses of action, so it comes up with ideas. Now, some of the consultation processes I've been involved in, as I said, they talk about the issues. So they say, these are the problems, and it outlines the problems, and then the consultation process says to the community, what do you think we should do about that? But this is slightly different. Green paper is slightly different because in a green paper, you go one step further and you say, there are a few different approaches we could take to solving this problem. We could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this. And the idea is, the idea is that the community then have some idea what you're going to do, and then they can think about whether they like those ideas or not, what they think of them, how they think they would impact on them. So the problem with the first approach, the advantage of the first approach is that it leaves everything open, and the community can come in with any ideas they like. The disadvantage of that approach is when you just set out the problem but you don't set out what you're thinking about doing about it, lots of people have trouble understanding, well, what options are really on the table? What would you really consider doing? And they can't necessarily think what you're thinking of doing, and so they don't know how to react, right? So in the green paper process, you go that step further and you say, these are the things we're thinking of doing, so now you know what we're thinking of doing, you can decide, well, do we like the sound of that? How would that affect me? I can imagine how that policy might affect me. I can imagine how that policy would change society, and I think it's a good idea. I think I'm willing to pay the price to go down that path, and that's why you might go down a green paper path, and that's what you're being asked to do here. So provide possible courses of action. Green paper is not a commitment to action. It's canvassing options, but the idea is that you wouldn't do it unless you had some intention of trying to make some change in the area. It's a tool to stimulate discussion, and it's a first step towards changing the law. So the process that I've sort of shown you in the second slide, you've got to identify the issue, very important. You've got to know what is the problem you're trying to solve here. What is the issue? The government sort of identifies that it's a problem it wants to solve, commissions a green paper. Public servants usually write green papers. They might do some consultation in the process of writing the green paper. They might talk to some experts. They might talk to some, depending on what it is, they might talk to some people in the community as well, who might be particularly affected by it. So that they can write the most helpful paper for public discussions. Then released for public discussion. As a result of the public discussion, the government might invite submissions to, write in and tell us what you think. It might go out and hold community meetings with people. It might go and talk to particular stakeholders who are going to be particularly affected by it. And then it gets all that information together, it thinks about it, and it turns it into a white paper, which is the government's public statement of this is what we're going to do. And then usually there's a number of steps in the white paper, can't necessarily do them all at once, but then it starts going through the process of implementing them. So the point is that by the time you get to the white paper, you've thought about all the problems. You know all the issues, you know what everybody thinks, so when you're proposing the action, you know what the consequences are going to be. So, in the slides we've got some examples of particular green papers, and if you wanted to, you could follow up and have a closer look at them. The references are there. And elements of a green paper, objectives. So once again, saying what it is that you're trying to achieve. Using simple language. Green papers are designed for public consultation processes. They're designed to communicate with the general public, And so they need to use language which everybody can understand. If they're written in a really technical way, that might be great for a couple of insiders who know all the jargon and know all the background science or whatever it is, but they won't be able to be understood by the general community who might be affected. So, if I've got a fireplace, I might know about fireplaces and you have a lot of fire and etc. etc. But I might not know much about the science of air conditioning or what happens to the smoke after it goes up the chimney. So it has to be written in a way that I can understand those things, so that I can start to understand why, even though I like my fire, it might be a bad thing to have a fire, right? Discussion of the issue. What is the issue? Who does it affect? Trying to identify who the people are who might be affected by it. Explaining why change is important. Explaining what the consequences it might be of not addressing the issue. What might happen if we do nothing. And understanding what we're already doing. Because in most difficult problems, we're already doing something. In the homelessness example, there are already heaps of services which deal with homelessness, of one sort or another. But that doesn't mean that we've solved the problem of homelessness and there isn't more to do. And but understanding what we're already doing and how that's contributing to the problem, to mitigating the problem, that's important. So the elements of a green paper. Discussion of the proposed actions. So you've got to set out what the different options are that you're thinking about. What issues will they address? So different proposals might solve different bits of the problem, right? So some proposals might help with one problem, other proposals might help with another problem. You might have things which you might be able to regulate the kind of firewood that people get, so that people aren't burning green wood which produces more smoke. So that might help with one thing. You might have a program where you pay householders to replace their wood fireplaces with other kinds of heaters, and that's addressing another part of the problem, right? One problem is people can't afford to replace their heaters. The other part of the problem is that some of the wood people burn generates more smoke. So they're different. You can have different proposals as part of your package, which introduce different elements of the problem. And it's okay to have proposals which only address one bit of the problem, because what you're trying to do is build up a package of things which together will make a difference. So what are the proposed actions? How will each action contribute to addressing the problem? Why it will work? Who's going to benefit from it? Which ones seem to be the most effective? Which ones seem to be contributing the best? So often you'll have proposals where you'll say, this will make a bigger difference, but it'll have a higher cost, or it'll affect more people, or it'll cause more disruption. So, but being able to explain those things, what are the choices that we as a community and the government on our behalf are going to have to make, is a key thing here, right? So that people can see why they're choosing between these options, and try and include evidence. If you've got evidence about things, if you know how many people it's going to affect, put how many people it's going to affect. If you know how much it's going to cost people to replace their wood heaters, put that in. So put in the things that are going to help people to make it real for people and for people to actually see what it really means for them. It also means that you've got places that people can go who are reading your green paper, who want to know more about the issue, right? Who want to do more research, because some people, when you consult with the community, some people will just think fairly narrowly about the problem. They'll explain how it affects them, or they'll give you their gut reactions to it. Other people will want to go right into it, and they'll want to do lots and lots of research, and they'll want to produce a lot of their evidence of their own. And so giving them the places to go and learn more about the problem is helpful. And it helps make the consultation process work. But it also helps build legitimacy, because if if you've seen to have done a good job in preparing your paper, and you've thought about all the issues and you can point to the evidence, then people who see the green paper process will say, well, they've obviously thought about this a lot, they've obviously gone into this in some detail, they've got evidence, they've pointed to references, they know what they're doing here, right? And that helps with building support behind change, even leaving aside the question of which particular change, but it gives people a sense of why they want to change and why this kind of change is a good idea. So the elements of the green paper. Another element of the green paper is that you need to have ideas about the consultation process. How are you going to engage the community on the process? I can't remember whether that was in your
our consultation
instructions.
process will actually be at the Parliament. So
Okay.
in writing your green paper, you don't really need to think through that.
Okay. So we would when we write papers, when we're going to do a consultation process, we have to set out in the paper all the ways we're going to consult. So we might say, you can write us a submission, but submissions close on the 5th of August, so you need to write to us by the 5th of August if you want us to consider your submission. And we might say we're going to be holding meetings in each capital city, and we're also going to some regional centres, so you can come, if you want to, you can come along to those meetings. If you want to come along, call this number and we'll make sure you get a place at the meeting. We might say, we might also contact, as I said, key stakeholders who are going to be affected by it and say, we're going to come and see you and talk to you and make sure that we've made a special effort to hear your views because we know you're going to be particularly affected by the change. So they're all things that we would do if we were sitting at a consultation green paper to ensure that people understood how they could have their say. So part of the process that you've been asked to do is to have recommendations, and normally in a green paper process we wouldn't have recommendations per se, but in other government reports, as I said, like I worked on the pension review and we had a pile of 39 or something recommendations in that. The Henry Tax Review, which had 100 and something recommendations, which we worked on as well. But in green paper processes you often would, but in this process you've been asked to have recommendations. So,
which is probably just the same as you've been talking about proposals, suggested courses of action.
yeah. So you've got some proposals. You need to sort of be able to explain why these proposals are a good idea. So you're thinking about how do you maximise the benefits? How do you ensure that we get the most effect out of this? How do we? How could these proposals work together? So you might say, well, in common, we really think you should do 3 things because in combination these 3 things will help to have the effect. So as I was saying before, in my fireplace example, you might say, well, we want to regulate the supply of wood to try and reduce the pollution caused by burning the wood, but we also want to try and reduce the number of people with wood fireplaces, so we're going to pay people not to have the fireplaces in the first place. So those 2 things work together to have an effect. So try and think about how the proposals could work together so that in combination they have a positive effect. Which things are going to work the best? These are obviously the ones to try, but also think about, well, what are the consequences? What is the price of things? So that, because most of these proposals will have negative consequences on somebody, because government's mostly about choosing between priorities. Structure the proposals in a similar way so they can easily be understood. So try and structure the proposal, so say who's going to do what. So who's going to take this action? Who's the action going to happen to? When's it going to happen by? They're all sort of important things to include in the description of proposals, so that people can once again, they can say, okay, so I've got a year and a half to adjust to this, that's okay, or you're going to make me do it by the 30th of June, that's pretty soon, you know, how am I going to get myself organised by the 30th of June, right? So that makes quite, you know, so people understanding the timelines is also important as well. So think about all those things when you're pulling together your list of proposals. So which ones are going to be the most effective? How can they work together? Who are they going to happen to? Who's going to do them? When are they going to happen? And how much are they going to cost? Which I suppose is part of who they're going to happen to in a way. So I think they're the things that we do. So there's probably a lot of talking already. I'm happy to take questions or to go back over things or talk more about other things if people want to.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Can you all put your hands together? Our group has decided on two topics.
Yep.
In regards to reduction in emissions, and we chose water because we tested the lake last
Yep.
term, and we're so close to it, so it's such a great resource. But the other topic that was related was food, and some of the kids are doing a topic on water and some doing food, and this is how Canberra is going to look in the year 2020
Yep.
based on water and food. So if they want to ask any specific questions, is that possible? Did you want to ask Andrew something about your topic? You are stuck with, or you have some ideas? Please do.
I have just a comment
Yes.
that two things Andrew said which might help you in this task are that one, it's complicated. You're writing a green paper because this issue about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and Canberra becoming more sustainable is complicated. And Andrew said, you know, in that last section about what your proposals might do and how they might affect people and how they might tie together to form a package. There are going to be winners, I guess you call them winners and losers in every proposal you have. So it's really important that you start to flesh some of those thoughts out in your green paper, because that's how you'll sell your proposals to the Parliament when the student representatives meet in November. And the idea there is, Andrew, that the best green papers will be presented at the Parliament, and those options or proposals for action will be presented, and kids then will vote on the best either package of proposals or the best individual proposals that they hear on a particular topic. So if you'd like to hear your proposal or see your proposal in the final white paper from this youth parliament, then some really clear thinking now while you're writing the green paper is great.
So, try one thing that I didn't talk much about before, but which I think is quite important, and we spend a lot of time on this in my work, is thinking about what are the principles that you construct policy around. So what are the things that, the values, if you like, that underpin what you're doing. And this also, the reason why you want to talk about principles is because it helps explain why you've come up with particular proposals. It helps set up criteria for evaluating the proposals and why is this proposal better than another proposal. And it helps to communicate with your audience about what is it, you know, about a shared vision. You're trying to build a shared vision about the kind of city we want to live in your case, kind of country we want to live in, what we think is important. So we would talk in our business, we would talk about, you know, all families having a basic acceptable standard of living, that we don't want to live in Australia where there are people who haven't got the money to feed and clothe their children and send them to school. You know, we would talk about equality between families in different circumstances, those sorts of things. We talk about making sure that people weren't discouraged from working, you know, that people have the opportunity to parent their children properly. I mean, we talk about those kind of things. you'll have your own set of values in relation to these topics, but the idea is that you think about what are the principles, that might be that people shouldn't impact adversely on the environment, or that that food should be healthy, or what. I mean, there's.
You think about these before you develop your proposals.
They'll help explain two things. They'll help explain why you think you've got a problem, and they'll help explain why these proposals would be good proposals to come at the problem. Now, the way all of us work, we probably already know what we think the problem is before we start that, and we already have some ideas on how we would like to fix the problem. But thinking about the principles will just help lift your paper up a bit, and help to explain to everybody else, well, why did you think this was a problem in the first place? My fireplace example, you could say, well, why do we care that there's air pollution? What matters is that when I sit in my lounge room, it's nice and warm, and that I've got this. I'm cheered up by the fire, and they're the things that matter. Why does it matter if there's air pollution outside, right? So there's reasons why it matters, but just explaining what those things are, so that people can understand. Why do I care if all the wood choppers go out of business and haven't got any money? Because, well, I care about it because they've got families as well. They've got kids they've got to feed as well. If we might think that it's a bad idea chopping down trees to burn in fireplaces, but we don't want people left destitute because we've changed the rules on them. So there's a principle there about why that matters, right? So if I've got to change my fireplace because I might not have any money. I might be on a minimum wage job, and well, you want me to change my fireplace, but where am I going to get $1,500 to buy a new fireplace? So these are all, there are principles there about, well, why do we care about these things? And that'll help explain why you thought you had a problem in the first place and why you think this is a good response to it.
An example I just flashed into my head would be perhaps Canberra being a very green city. We like our parks, we like our grasses, we like growing things. Perhaps you might want to consider, well, we need to have more water tanks to cater for that. We need to collect the water because obviously greenhouse warming, we're not going to have as much water anymore, etc. We're going to have floods and rains and all those things that climate change is caused by climate change, etc. So you might want to consider that. With food, perhaps we need to be growing food that doesn't have, too many herbicides, pesticides, etc. Grown locally so it doesn't get imported from all these long distance places and seasonal stuff. And like what you heard Bob Douglas tell you the other day, cows, etc. Beef is causing a lot of the carbon emissions. He eats only kangaroo now. Okay, different sort of a change in his life that is actually reducing the greenhouse gases. Here's some solid examples you can also have some. I realise that these kids have to go to next class. Okay, thank Anne also for being here today and good luck. And on Wednesday, can I just flash one more thing for you? We're having a lady come from the Office of the Commission for Sustainability talk to you about exactly the same sort of thing. So hopefully you'll have more detail. And you get to work on your assignment. Thank you. See you then.
So, understand the beginning, that's